Hi. Thank you for all coming to listen to my lecture, and thank you to the NAM Center for inviting me today. I have to first make a note. I think initially when I sent off my slight abstract, this chapter did look diachronically, where it compared images of the modern airport at Kimpo in the post-war period to the present, and looked at its changes and shifts in representation. But since then, the material from the post-war period was very rich, and I kind of turned it into a separate chapter. And I'm working on the intern chapter as a separate one that kind of continues. So this is about the first Kimpo airport and representations in the post-war period in the 60s and 70s predominantly. So I'm going to begin. Nothing else has fueled the imagination of modernity as the airport. Put most simply and succinctly, Put most simply and succinctly, the British novelist J.G. Ballard points out, airports and airfields have always had a special magic, gateways to infinite possibilities that only the sky can offer. By its association with flight in both its technological and psychosocial aspects, airports appear to elicit a sense of unbridled opportunity for the individual as well as a human culture as a whole. However, while the airport and air travel has become one of the most universal symbols of modernity in the second half of this 20th century, their representations in different historical geographical contexts have hardly been uniform. In The Railway Journey, Wolfgang Schivelbusch demonstrated how the railroads of an earlier era technologically mediated novel experiences and forms of consciousness, such as new ways of perceiving time and space, and produced new industrialized subjects throughout Europe and the US. Similarly, the new technology of the airport introduced new forms of consciousness of the emerging social order in the post-World War II period at an expanded scale and to a far greater degree. But in many places, the consciousness of new forms of social production and their relations unleashed by the 19th century railroad were layered with multiple and contradictory colonial, anti-colonial, and nationalist imaginaries. Likewise, representations of the post-war airport appear embedded within diverse trajectories of post-war modernization in a global configuration that form the prism by which seemingly universal desires for human freedom, moral and material progress, and a sense of infinite possibility was refracted. In South Korea, post-war representations of the modern airport were inextricably tied to the project of post-colonial nation building and modernization vis-a-vis its membership in the new US-led Cold War capitalist international system. The Kimpo era came into being as both a form of rupture and suture, as the new international gateway at Kimpo marked not only the passage from colonial transcontinental railways to post-colonial trans-Pacific airways, but also hinged South Korea to a new global map of the so-called free world of capitalist states. At the same time, what was once part of itself was not only without, but relegated out of its permissible international orbit. Layered upon the colonial military origins of Kimpo Airfield, a new civil airport terminal emerged in 1960 as the nation's gateway to its future modernity under the overwhelming influence of American economic and cultural dominance. As with many other modern institutions being established, the airport was based on American design models, funded by U.S. aid grants, and still operating under the jurisdiction of the U.S. Air Force. It would take another year after the new airport opening for jurisdiction to transfer into the hands of the South Korean government. Moreover, South Korea had only a handful of direct international routes, limited, of course, to non-communist nations, Tokyo, Seattle, Hong Kong, with the U.S. carrier Northwest Airlines operating the longest and most regular international air route in and out of Seoul. In this paper, I examined the historical geographically situated representation of Kimpo Terminal as a sign of the new Cold War modernity in the popular imaginary of South Korean film and literature of the post-war period. I focus on the South Korean Golden Age film Pak Sabang from 1960. in the interest of time, although my reading of this film derives from my engagement with the 1969 film Bitter But Once Again, 미워도 다시 한번, two stories by the popularly acclaimed and the late Park Wan-seo, Farewell at Kimpo Airport from 1974 and Encounter at the Airport from 1978, which I also examined in my dissertation chapter. I just want to stop quickly and explain this picture. This was taken in 1964, and part of my larger dissertation argues actually against the kind of non-place, abstract, global capitalist space kind of image of airports today. So I like contextualized pictures of airports because I think they are very contextualized objects. And this was in 1964, and this is a bunch of Korean students protesting Park Chung-hee and negotiators flying to Japan for the Japan-Korea reconciliation for. Riddled with sentiments of loss and displacement, international longing as well as national confinement. In all of these texts, the airport was used as both a formal narrative device to primarily aestheticize the increasing reality of post-war international emigration in South Korea. While these texts did not thematize the airport as its narrative subject of modernity, as in the official representation of the airport that surrounded the built structure, it came to figure an important trope in the larger representational framework of the modern experience in post-colonial South Korea. Like its American contemporaries, such as the TWA terminal in New York, which opened in 1962, and the Washington Dulles terminal, which opened also in 1962, which inaugurated the jet age in the United States, the modern Kimpo terminal, which opened in 1960, fashioned in modernist international-style trademarks like the Corbusier, Brise Soleil, and Pilates, was celebrated as nothing less than the embodiment of modernity and sophistication in South Korea. However, the modernist aesthetic took on quite different meanings as signs of the new Cold War modernity in the two contexts. The popular imaginary of American terminals were shaped during the heyday of American cultural and economic hegemony across the capitalist world, while Kimpo Terminal came at the heels of a fledgling state of a recently divided nation with diametrically opposed political economic alignments. TWA and Washington Dulles inaugurated mass air travel as the new luxurious mode of domestic and international tourism, with more than 51 million passengers flying out of U.S. airports in 1959. South Korean passenger traffic totaled 14,000 the same year, and Kimpo Terminal became the launching pad for post-war mass immigration long before it turned into a medium for tourism due to the government restrictions on international travel until the mid to late 1980s. As the South Korean military state reversed its post-war pro-natalist policy to control overpopulation and urbanization in South Korea, in addition to the widespread advocacy of birth control, the government adopted a specific immigration policy designed to export its surplus people in 1962. In addition to controlling overpopulation, the policy was designed to secure remittances sent home by Koreans abroad to earn much-needed foreign currencies as part of the government's first five-year National Economic Development Plan. Immigration scholars such as Il-soo Kim and Bonasoo-chan Light have shown how the government shaped the pattern of immigration through laws which permitted and excluded certain forms of immigration and people, as well as directly facilitating large group emigrations of South Korean migrant workers through agreements with receiving nations as a form of modern post-colonial statecraft accompanying its export-oriented industrialization. Formulated toward and evolving with the state's nation-building efforts to protect national interests and the national prestige of Korea among the countries receiving its immigrants, the extremely wealthy, determined in 1975 as those with assets valued over $100,000, as well as the extremely poor, including those who are considered social outcasts, such as ex-convicts, psychotics, and alcoholics, and those who cannot perform useful physical labor, were banned from immigration. Visas and passports were hard to come by, save for the moderately wealthy, bureaucrats, students, and various groups of professionals and workers. Within the force field of national interest and those of other states in the Cold War bipolar interstate system, which shaped particular constraints on freedoms of international mobility of South Koreans, large numbers of the population began exiting the country for temporary to more permanent political and economic emigrations as migrant workers or immigrants in the 1960s. In this process, the airport mediated a new technological dislocation in South Korea, extending dislocations of the Korean War and national division directly onto a new international stage. If there's a symbolic character of airports shared across different contexts that function as a threshold to various experiences of modernity, it might be located as its ability to join the technological and psychosocial aspects of modern industrialization in one image. Although expressed by others, as Paul Andrew of Airports de Paris points out, the airport is a special cultural site in that it, quote, is the locus of meeting between what is most universal, mobile, and modern, the airplane, that dangerous marvel, and what is most primitive, the sense of belonging to a place and the very deep-seated desire to fly, to be somewhere else at once. Although this symbolic character may lie at the heart of what animates the airport imaginary of human progress and possibility, the myriad airport stories and their varying modes of representation reveal that the airport has long operated as a meta-language or mythic sign rather than symbol or a first-order sign in the semiological sense. According to Roland Barthes, myth is characterized by the intentions and motivations of context-specific signifieds which distort but does not abolish the meaning of the sign of the first-order semiological system. In the parasitical process, the mythic concept of the signified, the mythic feeds off the existence of the full meaning of the primary sign by deforming it and making it speak in its service. Modeled on Marx's ideas of alienation, the mythic signifier overtakes the meaning of the primary sign, distorting and deforming it through the motivation of the mythic concept. In myth, Barthes states, quote, motivation is unavoidable. It is nonetheless fragmentary. To start with, it is not natural. It is history which supplies its analogies to the form. Then the analogy between the meaning and the concept is never anything but partial. The form drops many analogous features and keeps only a few. It keeps the sloping roof, the visible beams in the Basque chalet, abandons the chairs, the barn, the weathered look, etc. End quote. As myths of modernity, airport representations are always partial images, that they have been naturalized as distinct signs of modernity that vary from place to place derives from its selective mythic semiological character. And because they are motivated by particular intentions or experiences within various historical contexts, they not only fix partial images of the heterogeneous process of modernization taking place at a global scale, they can only provide partial images of the full history and experience of modernity in those select contexts. Within this framework of the airport as a mythic sign of modernity, one way in which the representation of airports was naturalized in the U.S. and European imagination was as part of the modern experience was through the science fiction mode of representation, whether they were of utopian or dystopian character. In Naked Airport, A Cultural History of European and American Airports, Alistair Gordon begins with a childhood anecdote about his first visit to John F. Kennedy Airport in New York City in 1964. Gordon was so enthralled with the flashy stained glass entry to American Airlines, the flying saucer roof of Pan Am, the endless glass facade of the arrivals building, and the bird-like structure of the TWA terminal, that the pavilions at the New York World's Fair in nearby Flushing Meadows seemed stodgy in comparison, end quote. As he watched his cousin, quote, walk up the long umbilical departure tube, turning once to wave like an astronaut, end quote, Gordon imagined that his cousin was flying, quote, not to London, but to Mars. Brimming with youthful anticipation mixed with the steadfast optimism in technological progress prevalent in the post-war American milieu, Gordon writes, quote, my cousin's departure had been dreamlike and elusive, but at the same time, very real, the essential modern moment when technology seemed perfectly in tune with human aspiration. Before hijacking and air rage, before jumbo jets, before deregulation, dysfunctional baggage carousels, and electromagnetic scanners. The technological utopian and futuristic character of Gordon's modern experience of the airport indexes the historical context of U.S. within the world system while not exhausting it. Having surpassed Europe since the end of World War II, the U.S. at this time was the world's vanguard in both military and civil aviation. The new jet age, beginning in the late 50s, took off most spectacularly in the U.S. with a spate of sensational new airport terminals like the TWA terminal at Kennedy, the St. Louis International Airport, Washington Dulles, and Chicago's new O'Hare, combined with a surge in domestic and international travel. The terminals that had so impressed Gordon were endowed with a futurism analogous to American forays in outer space, as well as World Fair exhibitions in which exhibits like General Motors' Futurama inspired its users to look ahead to the next century with a sense of boundless possibility. Only the TWA terminal was more convincing for Gordon in that it, quote, wasn't pretending the future, this was the future, end quote. The science fiction imagination was also a touchstone for the representation of the airport in Europe, but perhaps due to the recent war, tended towards more stark or dystopian narratives, as in the novels of Ballard and the French filmmaker Chris Marker's La Jetée. The French writer and filmmaker Chris Marker imagined the future through the central image of the pier at Orly Airport in his 1962 film La Jetée. While La Jetée also ruminates on time travel, memory, and human aspiration, this dystopian science fiction narrative is set in post-apocalyptic Paris in the aftermath of an imaginary World War III, where the future of human technology is represented by an uninhabitable Earth's surface. Forced underground amongst other survivors, the protagonist is selected to conduct time travel experiments into the past and future to search for ways to sustain life in the present. Within the particular circular nature of time presented in this film, his childhood memory of the pier at Orly becomes his passage to the past and future, the possibility of life in the present, as well as the foreshadowing of his own death. Completed in 1961, the sleek new airport at Orly was one of the first new terminals emerging in Europe, where many of the great pre-war airports lay in ruins or were in the process of reconstruction. As the once great air centers of the continent lay in shambles, the airport as a temporal device of modern imaginings became refocused on memory in this French filmmaker's film, opening up possibilities for human progress not only in the unbounded future, but also the multiplicity of pasts. In the South Korean post-war popular imaginary, the airport departure was likewise an essential modern moment, a threshold to the future. However, in the post-colonial context of South Korea, it inspired a different kind of imaginary affect as well as mode of representation. Indexed to the experience of South Korean emigration, the airport was imagined as a space of tearful farewells permeated with sentiments of loss and longing, as well as associated with the promise of social and national mobility through horizontal journeys across geopolitical space-time, rather than primarily vertical temporal travel seen in the Euro-American models. Like a number of other South Korean melodramas of the period, the 1960 film Pak Sabang, or Mr. Pak or Neighbor Pak, makes use of the new Kimpo terminal as a stage for an emotionally charged farewell that brings the film to a close in a double movement of resolving the narrative plot while opening up an affective wound as an ambivalent resolution to the conflicts of social modernization presented throughout the film. Pak Sabang tells the story of an aging father whose dislocation within the rapidly modernizing society around him is negotiated primarily through the conflicts that arise in his relationships with his 3 adult children. Pak is a proud father of 3 children, 2 of whom have been quite successfully incorporated into the emerging post-war modern society. His only son, Youngbum, holds a managerial level position at a flourishing export-oriented pharmaceutical company just outside of Seoul, while his second daughter, Myungsun, is a typist at the Seoul office of Northwest Airlines. Within the otherwise pleasant domesticity of Pak's household, small clashes arise in light of his old-fashioned attitude towards his 2 daughters' budding romances and his son's impending opportunity to go abroad for his company to advance his career. Pak's recalcitrance towards these developments are highlighted with both comical and dramatic excess throughout the film, reinforcing the sizable generation gap between Pak and his children and the acute sense of his anachronism as an able patriarch in a rapidly modernizing society. Like Romance Papa and Stray Bullet, also from the period, film scholars and anthropologists regard Pak Sabang as part of a group of melodramas which explore the crisis of male subjectivity and patriarchy as a prominent narrative of the post-war experience of social change in South Korea. Anthropologist Nancy Abelman reads the film as, quote, emblematic of golden age melodrama of social transformation, end quote, in that the film's, quote, staging of patriarchy, alternately comic, melodramatic, and in certain moments very real and heavy-handed, presents the father figure asserting himself, even as he is depicted as being overshadowed by the mere pawns of larger social forces. While Peck's dislocation from modern Seoul as an anachronistic figure is foregrounded through intergenerational conflict via the focus on Pak as family patriarch, it is also signified by the localized provincial nature of his work and his working class position. Akin to the Western chimney sweep, Pak Sabang repairs flues of traditional ondol homes, which use coal briquettes that were being phased out by the industrial advance of modern ondol floor systems designed with gas-heated metal pipes. Sorry. The ondol heating system itself is moreover part of a vernacular architectural tradition that cannot be found elsewhere. Despite Park's working class position, he is respected and liked in his poor hillside neighborhood called Taltongnae or Moon Village, in part because of his upright and upwardly mobile children. However, both his class position and his localized Korean yet anachronistic profession are essential to how he is figured as a dislocated figure of modernizing Seoul and allow for the particular staging of his modern conversion. In both the narrative and visual structure of the film, the airport is presented as part of a transnational mise-en-scène that codes particular spaces, people, or events as modern throughout the film, leading to particular perceptions of time and space of South Korean post-war modernity. The sign of a transnational elsewhere, which are woven into the signs of transnational elsewhere, which are woven into urban Seoul, double as signs of the very modern forces that challenge Park's traditional patriarchal role as they invade the sanctity of his neighborhood and home. They're predominantly Western, but not limited to it, as East and Southeast Asian locations also shape this Cold War global imaginary. Moreover, they're strongly coded along class lines. Wealth status and upward mobility invariably belong to the realm of the transnational modern, as a geopolitical space-time concept, which is positioned against the working class Park, bound to tradition and provincialism and produced as modernity's other. Within his most intimate sphere, Park's anachronism is brought into relief by the simultaneously modern transnational commitments of his son, whose successful white-collar managerial career compels him to emigrate abroad to manage a branch of his company in Thailand, and his youngest daughter, Myung-sun, perhaps the most modern character in the film, who works at Northwest Airlines and is planning to marry her co-worker whom she has been dating without the consent of her father. Incidentally, it's a Northwest plane on which Youngbum departs. Beholden to what would appear to be traditional cultural and moral values, Park is reluctant to give his blessing on both accounts, as he cannot fathom the absence and loss of his filial son and does not approve of Myung-sun's romance, which forms part of her general modern lifestyle, along with new forms of recreation or leisure like hiking or working outside the home, even though he regards her job with some admiration. In addition, his anachronism features prominently in one of the opening scenes where we see Park appear both socially and culturally displaced, awkwardly sitting on a chair, sipping a glass of Western liquor in the modern living room of one of his more well-to-do neighborhood clients, or his obvious unease as he steps into the tabang, or a coffee shop, looking for his son. Park's temporal dislocation is visually highlighted by the disjunctive character of two sets of spaces cohabiting Seoul in the film. I'll show you those images. So this is the opening scene of the film. Well,
전셋집 부전 받으러 가는 길이야. 아직 못 받았어? 돈은 불놈이 줘야 받겠두군. 오늘은 틀림없이 약속했네. 그래? 네?
okay. So that's one of the spaces, and it's sorry. puck space, and then this is the other space. So this is Myung-sun, his youngest daughter, and this is her modern romance, her fiancé. Okay. So the hillside shantytown, which opens the film with Puck meandering uphill with 2 pails of water, as well as his neighborhood tavern, are contrasted to the pristine spaces of modern Seoul inhabited by his children, which also move at a faster speed, both in the filming and in the characters' movements. The orderly space of Myung-sun's Northwest office features a neat arrangement of desks, while the walls are decorated with Northwest Airline posters of Washington, D.C., Florida, and New York. Youngbum's pharmaceutical export factory is, moreover, another modern space and a showcase of modern urban planning, which features rational integration of factory office buildings and dormitories, while inside a team of uniformed female workers operate a modern assembly line. As Gregory Henderson described in vivid detail, Seoul at this time was, quote, half city with mounting buildings, streetcars, electricity, taxis, and half macrocephalic monster growing cancerously in hillside shacks and caves, noisome alleys, and settlements without water or electricity. The film maps the bifurcated landscape of post-war modern Seoul onto the discrepant temporalities of a belated Pak and his modern children. The most dramatic staging of Pak's dislocation, however, which most conspicuously threatens his mantle as family patriarch, is in the home of his future son-in-law's aunt, a Hawaiian emigre. I'll show you that clip. This is a bit long.
주식 고모님께서 아버지를 8시까지 오시라고 그랬어요.
주식 고모가?
네.
왜?
왜 하와이에서 돌아온 고모 있잖아요?
하와이.
네.
아버지, 주식이와 명순이 관계 문의인데 가보세요. 집이 어디냐?
제가 알아요.
중요한 일 같은데 댕겨오시죠.
아버지, 양복 입으세요. 시계도 차시고.
그건 별소리. 날 보고 쪽팔 좋아? 아무런 모르대.
옷 갈아입고 나올게요.
빨리 나와.
여기에요.
그래.
아버지, 누가 나와서 누구시냐고 물으면 명순이 아버지라고 하세요.
알았다. 얘도 요래비가 기다려. 돌아가 봐.
아버지, 친절하게 해드리세요.
알았대도.
그리고 시간이 늦었다고 사과하세요.
그래.
어디서 오셨죠?
야, 내가 명순이 아버지라 그래라.
아, 그러세요? 들어오세요.
문 안 열어.
네, 났어요. 들어오세요. 밀지 않아요. 여기 앉아 계세요.
뭐냐?
명순이 부친 되시나요?
지가 박천복이시다. 시간이 늦어서 미안스럽습니다.
좋아요. 이리 앉으세요.
네.
며칠 전부터 만나고 싶었어요. 왜 불렀는지 아시겠죠?
제 딸내미가 혼상 문제 아니갑죠.
그래요. 알고 보니 아주 훌륭한 따님을 두셨더군요.
뭐 동네에서도 아이는 얌전하다고 모두 칭찬합니다만
누가 날 찾아오면 없다고 그래? 네. 찾으시죠.
얼굴 들고 왔습니다.
홍찬가 드세요.
이거 좋은 정말.
홍차 잡수실 줄 모르시나? 이걸 까잡세.
왜? 아니 왜? 어디 불편하십니까?
생각 외로 유식하군요. 구공탄 아구이가 전문이시라면서요.
그러십죠. 장안에 웬만한 댁들은 아궁지에 재손 거치지 않는 집이 얼마 없죠.
그 아주 좋은 직업이군요. 박서방, 오늘 밤 오시라고 한 건 댁의 따님과 우리 주식이와의 관계를 끊어달라는 거.
아니, 우리 집 애가 뭐 잘못한 거라도 있습니까?
그게 아니라 주식의 약혼자는 댁의 따님같이 무식하고 교양 없는 여자가 필요하다. 최소한도 대학 출신이 아니면 허락할 수 없대. 주식의 약혼자는 현재 하와이 주립대학 졸업반이 필연적으로 안심은 중에는 대대 학부 출신이 축으로 들어오게 됐다는 사실을 알았어. 부모가 안 계시다고 해도 주식을 까고 댕기는 거죠. 저희 할아버지는 2조 마렵에 대강까지 지낸 양반.
아, 그런 말 하려고 날 불렀어.
그렇죠. 구체적으로 말씀드리자면 대학 출신은 대학 출신이죠. 명문의 집안은 명문의 집안, 노동자는 노동자의 집안. 훌륭한 사회감을 보려면 부모 노릇을 똑똑히 하세요. 남의 가문을 더럽게 한다고 했지. 주식은 절대로 대개 따님하고 결혼시킬 수가 없어요. 알았어요? 얘기는 다 끝났어. 나가세요.
자식, 시도 좋다. 지져라 임마. 너도 명문의 집 다스리는.
비가 오는데 웬일이세요? 어서 약 좀 한 잔 드세요. 아니 무슨 일이 있었어? 누구 그 싸우셨어? 아이고 고집도.
아버지 늦으셨군요.
어머나 목젖이셨네. 아버지 얘기가 잘 됐어요?
약속하셨어요? 이영고마 홍찬 까서 먹는 거야. 까서 먹는 거야. 무슨 말씀이에요? 아니 동지 애들은 홍차 말이야. 네. 까 넣어서 먹는 거야. 통째로 넣어서 불려 먹는 거야. 물에 타 먹어야죠.
무슨 일을 다 하시죠?
왜 나를 좀 가르쳐주지 않았니?
아버지 물 말씀해보세요.
기가 막히네. 아버지. 네, 무슨 일 있었죠? 명순아, 내 앞으로 내 손톱이 닳도록 이렇게 가글, 너 대학에 가서 공부해. 내가 배우지 못해서 남친 가르치지 못한 이해.
Okay. That was a long scene, but an important one. Okay. Breaks my heart every time. The aunt's callous humiliation of and denigration of Pak as an ignorant laborer, staged in melodramatic excess on numerous levels, triggers the climactic turning point of the film. In sharp contrast to the spare, modest, traditional style house of Pak Sabang, the luxurious home of the Hawaiian aunt teems with cosmopolitan excess. Her living room overflows with an abundance of Western technology and culture to a degree unparalleled in any of Pak Sabang's prior encounters with modern environments. The space of modern luxury illustrated by Western furniture, a television set, radio, electric fan, abstract paintings, Japanese dolls, and flower arrangements is heightened by the barking of the English or American bulldog. The scene just before he goes to see the aunt, where he's sitting on the floor being fanned by his daughter and son, is clearly contrasted with Pak sitting in her living room as she walks over and switches on an electric fan. The aunt begins to denigrate Pak as soon as he sits down, but upon seeing Pak's unfamiliarity with the tea bag, she launches into a full tirade about how Pak's daughter is not suitable marriage material for her college-educated nephew of Yangban descent. There's an important slippage in the scene that brings together the various signs through which the modern has been represented in the film thus far. Pak's unfamiliarity with the Western teabag is equated by the aunt with his lack of cultural knowledge, proving his ignorance and low-class position as a common laborer. It's not that Pak is so uncouth as to not know how to enjoy a cup of tea. His cultural faux pas, which is capitalized on by the aunt to humiliate him, was perhaps what he would have done while drinking loose tea in much of Asia or elsewhere in the world. Theoretically, knowledge of another culture's rituals and delicacies do not function as a form of class differentiation, but the cosmopolitan imaginary of post-war South Korea appears to do exactly that. Knowledge and performance of cosmopolitan culture, though primarily Western or American, or the possession of foreign commodities, are the most explicitly explicitly conflated with a higher social status and class position throughout the scene, but in the scene. Before this turning point, while the spaces of the transnational modern and spaces of Pak were clearly demarcated, Pak was quite at home in his non-modern half of Seoul, authoritative and respected in his sphere. In an earlier scene, as Pak drinks Korean rice liquor with his neighbor, Pak confides in him about the unpleasant taste of Western liquor he had tried at a client's house earlier that day. His friend assures him that rice liquor is what is best suited for Koreans. But after this turning point, the certainty of this cultural ground fractures along with the recognition of his belatedness. It is also important to note that this recognition occurs through his perception of the projection of the aunt's perception of him. It occurs through his awareness or recognition of the gaze of the other. His humbling and traumatic encounter functions a rude awakening for Pak. It's the counter encounter that makes his life flash before his eyes and leads him to doubt for the first time the existential ground or meaning of worldview that he has long stood upon. The thunder and lightning give expression to Pak's consternation mixed with anger and a deeply wounded pride. He returns home and vows to send his daughter to college and apologizes to his children. Even though he himself had been so proud of his children, he recognizes that out there in modern society, outside the comfortable shantytown, outside the limits of his non-modern cognizance, they were only looked upon as the uneducated children of a flu repairman. He sees himself as having become a hindrance and also entering modernity as inevitable. With his turning point, Pak undergoes a general conversion, and he comes to relinquish his truculence toward the unfamiliar changes that encroach upon his everyday. He agrees to allow his son to accept the employment position abroad, and he accepts both Myung-sun and Yong-sun's fiancés as future son-in-laws. As the final scene of the film, the tearful airport farewell leaves us with a highly ambivalent ending which stages the resolution of Pak's dislocation with another form of dislocation.
사장님, 다녀오겠습니다. 잘 부탁하네. 아버지, 안녕히 계십시오. 영순이가 안 오는 걸 보니 주시가 대단한 모양이에요. 걱정 마라. 내 한번 내가 볼 테야. 예.
무슨 일이 생기면 피운지 해라.
예. 다녀오겠어요. 부모님을 잘 부탁하네.
형님 염려 마세요.
그리고 영순이도 잘 부탁하고. 안녕히 계십시오.
네, 안녕히 계십시오. 어서 들어가거라. 우리도 가서.
아버지, 지원이도
어디?
지원이 올라가세요.
왜? 빨리 와. 어머니 어디 갔어? 영웅아.
예, 어서 들어가거라. 그래. 오빠. 오빠. 몸 조심해요. 어서 들어가거라. 오빠. 어머냐. 오빠가.
어머니 그만 들어가십시다.
어머니 그만 들어가. 그래.
영웅아. 네가 내 앞을 떠날 줄 내 미처 몰랐구나. 난 너 돌아올 때만 손꼽아 기다리지. 갔다 왔다 할 때 비행기만 튼튼해. 나 돌아올 때 너도 비비 같은 아들이 나 도와 나가지고 나라.
Gathered in the sleek modern lobby of Kimpo Terminal, Pak and his family, along with his son's employer and co-workers, bid farewell to Youngbum and his new bride. As Youngbum receives a bouquet of flowers from his co-worker, he proceeds with personal farewells to everyone present. Neighbor Pak, featured throughout the film in traditional Korean dress, is uncharacteristically dressed in a modern Western suit, like the other men present, while Youngbum even wears a corsage pinned to his jacket. His mother and sister are donned in simple but neat hanboks, as Youngbum's wife is dressed in a formal black dress. After Youngbum finishes his goodbyes, he and his wife bow and proceed to the tarmac. The family and guests hurriedly climb the stairs observation deck to watch Youngbum board the plane. As they call out to him the last words, Youngbum waves to them as he hesitantly walks on board, while the eldest daughter and her boyfriend remain to console their crying mother. The camera takes us to Paksabang walking alone on the quaint tree-lined road. The movie ends with cross-cutting shots between Pak and his son. On the verge of tears, Pak looks up at the plane taking off, uttering a more sentimental farewell to his son, while Youngbum is seated aboard the plane, hunched over in tears. Prefiguring the ubiquitous scenes of lovers parting at the airport in contemporary South Korean films and television dramas, the particularly emotional farewell between Pak So-bang and his son dramatizes the larger family separation by foregrounding the sentiment of loss shared between the two principal characters, the one who leaves and the one who's left behind. While Park is portrayed as a loving father to all three of his children, he shares a particularly close relationship with his son, on whom he relies and regards as his pride and joy. The airport ending thus performs two conflicting roles in a split mode of persuasion. It serves as a resolution of the narrative conflict of Park's modernization, marking his entry into modern time, which is coupled with a heartrending sentiment of family separation. As in other modern melodramas of the period, such as Keep Silent When Leaving from 1964 or Bitter Once Again from 1969, as well as Park Won-so's Farewell at the Airport, Kimpo Airport becomes a site of family division, staging a personalized echo of the national partition in the post-war production of the Korean diaspora, which doubles as both the path and wound of modernity. Simultaneously including loss and hope, the post-war airport is figured as a site of an ambivalent modernity as it opens the stories to optimistic futures, as well as uncertain future reunions. In the popular post-colonial imagination in South Korea, rather than imagining the modern moment as temporal journeys into the next century or to the past before apocalyptic annihilation, as in the Euro-American narratives, the airport operates primarily as a geopolitical space-time passage in which entry into modern time was associated with a horizontal but discrepant movement across geopolitical space. Through emigration as a path to social mobility, the airport signified a threshold to the modern present of Cold War modernity, whose apex or prime meridian was located elsewhere than the nation. The class narrative of modernity is used to represent the experience of deparochialization or a form of cultural alienation to be at the heart of entry into the modern time of the extremely hierarchical, disjunctive geopolitical space of modern world capitalism. If the character of Pak could be read as an allegory of the modern nation, the ability to imagine the modern nation in post-colonial Korea was predicated on an ambivalent awareness of the simultaneity of national times. The airport becomes a technology of deciphering what Partha Chatterjee has described as a deep ambiguity towards modernity and skepticism over its consequences in the concept and experience of the modernity of the once colonized, arising from discrepancy between the universal dreams and freedoms associated with modernity and the highly restricted and differentiated access to these dreams for different races and nationalities. This is my conclusion. These texts allow us to peer into the lived space of the modern airport, presenting a competing and supplementary vision of this mythic modern signifier than that of the conceived space of the airport as represented in the official South Korean government discourse. Unlike the official modernization myth of the airport terminal that sought to transcend national division through membership in a unified and universal international system, this competing myth emphasized new separations, revealing an important affective kernel at the heart of the larger cultural alienation entailed in cultural translations in highly uneven hierarchical international semiotic context of meaning and value production. The Farewell at Kimpo Airport is a modern myth of loss and longing accompanying the innumerable separations of South Korean families and friends in the post-war period, which spread over 10% of the population across 6 continents by 1980. This paper suggests that South Koreans' affective relation to the airport may be one important location of the modern subjectivity of South Korean post-colonial nationhood, albeit one that has been eschewed by the dominant myths of the airport, in which the airport is taken as a sign of the continuous march of South Korean development. Moreover, in film and popular media, such as television and dramas of the contemporary period, the airport farewell, now anchored to Incheon Airport, which has since its opening in 2001 relegated Kimpo Airport to domestic flights, has come to signify temporary sojourns and guaranteed returns, as well as giving way to increasing scenes of airport arrivals in a changing South Korean global imaginary. But along the twists and bends that interrupt the linear narrative of historical modern time of national capitalist development, arise the unexpected effects and combinations of heterotemporalities and spaces of difference as tenacious if melancholy vestiges of eclipsed post-colonial histories, like the outmoded control tower from 1961, which indelibly marks the new Kimpo E-Mart as a tenacious if melancholy vestige of Kimpo's terminal's own history, traces abound of the post-colonial popular imaginary of airports and contemporary representations of new departures and ethnic return migrations that cannot be folded into the dominant narrative of capitalist progress now operating under the sign of globalization. Thank you.